What if the weakest race in a fantasy world was secretly the only one without a level cap? In a world where elves stop at level 120, orcs peak at 80, and even demons hit their ceiling, one human discovers something impossible. The more he suffers, the faster he grows. No limits, no rules, just infinite grind. But there's a cost, and the system is starting to notice. If you want to see how a weak human breaks the entire system and becomes something even the world can't classify, hit like, drop a comment, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. No one remembered when the system first appeared. It had always been there, like gravity, like air, like the quiet certainty that everything in the world had a limit. Levels defined strength. Caps defined destiny. And in a world where dragons soared above mountains and elves bent magic like breathing, those limits were everything. Kael learned that early, long before he ever picked up a weapon, long before he ever saw a dungeon. Humans were weak. Not in the way children were weak, or the way the untrained were weak. It was deeper than that. Structural, absolute. They started slower, learned slower, and worst of all, they stopped sooner. Level cap, the guild clerk had said without even looking up. Estimated around 40, maybe 50 if you're lucky. The words had been delivered like a fact, not an insult. That made them worse. Kael stood in the crowded guild hall, watching names appear and vanish on the request board, each one tied to quests that would never be his. Parties formed quickly, elves grouping with elves, dwarves with dwarves, even orcs finding their own kind. Humans waited. Or more often, they didn't bother waiting at all. They took what scraps they could find and hoped it was enough. "You looking for a group?" The voice came from his left. Kael turned to see a tall elf, armor polished, expression calm in the way only someone strong could afford to be. Behind her stood two others, another elf, a mage by the look of him, and a broad-shouldered warrior with a blade that hummed faintly with enchantment. Kael nodded once. "Yeah." The elf's eyes flicked briefly over him, not lingering, not dismissive, just assessing. "Level? 5. A pause, not long, but long enough. "We're running a mid-tier dungeon," she said. "Minimum entry is 20. Kael exhaled through his nose. "Figured." The mage behind her spoke next, his tone softer but no less certain. "It's not personal. Humans just don't scale well." There it was. Not cruelty, just truth as they understood it. Kael had heard it 100 times, 1,000. He gave a small nod, more out of habit than agreement. "Yeah, I know." The elf inclined her head slightly, as if acknowledging his understanding, then turned away. Conversation over, opportunity gone. Just like that. Kael stood there for a moment longer, watching as they joined another group, higher level, better equipped, already discussing strategy in terms he barely understood. Then he looked back at the board. Most of the quests were already taken. The ones that remained weren't worth much. Low reward, low risk, low experience. Safe, useless. His gaze lingered on one in particular, tucked into the corner as if it didn't quite belong. Abandoned mine, irregular activity. No level recommendation, no party requirement, just a note at the bottom. Previous team did not return. Kael stared at it longer than he should have. Then he reached out and took it. The clerk barely glanced up as he registered the request. "You sure?" he asked lazily. "That one's not standard." "I noticed," Kael replied. The clerk shrugged. "Your funeral?" "Maybe it was." Kael left the guild without another word, the quest slip folded in his hand. The sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows across the stone streets of the city. Most adventurers would wait until morning. Better visibility, better preparation, better odds. Kael didn't. By the time he reached the edge of the forest, the light was fading. By the time he found the mine entrance, it was gone entirely. The opening yawned in the side of a hill, dark and silent, the wooden supports around it worn and splintered with age. No guards, no signs of recent activity, just emptiness. Kael stepped inside. The air changed immediately, cooler, heavier, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and something else beneath it. Something metallic. He moved slowly at first, letting his eyes adjust, his hand resting lightly on the worn handle of his blade. It wasn't anything special, no enchantments, no rare materials, just steel. Reliable. The tunnel stretched forward, branching occasionally, the ground uneven beneath his boots. There were marks on the walls, old pick strikes, newer scratches, something deeper that didn't match any tool he recognized. He followed the main path. Minutes passed, then more. The silence pressed in around him, broken only by the sound of his own footsteps. No monsters, no movement, nothing. Kael frowned slightly. Too quiet, he muttered, as if the mine had been waiting for him to say it. Something shifted in the darkness ahead. Not a sound, not exactly. More like the absence of one. Kael stopped. His grip tightened. And then it came. Not from ahead, but from the side. A blur of motion, low and fast, slamming into him with enough force to knock him off balance. He hit the ground hard, air leaving his lungs in a sharp burst as claws scraped across his arm, drawing blood. Kael rolled instinctively, avoiding a second strike that gouged into the dirt where his head had been a moment before. He pushed himself up, eyes straining to catch the shape in the dark. It moved again, too fast, too erratic. Not like any creature he had trained against. No pattern. No hesitation. Just attack. Kael swung, his blade cutting through empty air as the thing slipped past him, striking again from behind. Pain flared across his back. He stumbled forward, barely keeping his footing. Not good, he muttered under his breath. This wasn't a low-level quest, not even close. Whatever this was, it was stronger, faster, and it wasn't giving him time to think. The next attack came from above. Kael reacted on instinct, raising his blade just in time to catch the impact. The force drove him to one knee, the creature's weight pressing down, claws scraping against steel with a harsh, grating sound. For a brief moment, just a moment, he saw it. Twisted, lean, eyes reflecting what little light there was. Not natural, not normal. Kael's arms trembled under the strain. He was outmatched, completely. The logical choice was clear. Run, retreat, survive. But Kael didn't move. Because something else was happening. Beneath the fear, beneath the pain. A flicker of something he couldn't quite name. The system pulsed faintly at the edge of his awareness. Not a notification. Not yet. Just presence. The creature lunged again. Kael let it. Not fully, not carelessly, but just enough. He shifted at the last second, the claws missing his throat by inches as he drove his blade forward, not aiming for precision, but for impact. The strike connected. Not clean, not lethal, but enough. The creature recoiled, screeching, its movement faltering for the first time. Kael didn't hesitate. He pressed forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring the exhaustion already creeping into his limbs. Another strike, then another. each one rougher than the last, less controlled, more desperate. But they landed, and slowly, the balance shifted. The creature adapted. So did he. It struck faster, he moved earlier. It changed angles. He stopped trying to predict and just reacted. Not clean, not perfect, but enough. Finally, with one last uneven swing, his blade found something vital. The creature collapsed, its form twitching once before going still. Silence returned. Real silence this time. Kael stood there, breathing hard, blood dripping from his arm, his entire body shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden absence of it. Then the system triggered. Experience gained. The words appeared in his mind, clearer than anything else in the dark, followed by something that made him freeze. The number was wrong. Not slightly off, not a small increase. Wrong. Too high. Way too high. Kael blinked once, then again, as if expecting it to correct itself. It didn't. Level up. Once, then again, and again. The notifications stacked, one after another, faster than he could process them. His breath caught. That's not possible, but it was happening. He could feel it, not as strength, not immediately, but as something deeper. Growth. Rapid, unstable, real. When it finally stopped, Kael stood there in the darkness, his mind racing, his body still trembling from the fight. Slowly, he looked down at his hands, then back at the creature on the ground, then into the deeper shadows of the mine ahead. For the first time since he had entered, he smiled. Not because he had won, not because he was stronger, but because something didn't make sense. And for once, that might actually be a good thing. Kael did not leave the mine. That was the first decision he made after the shaking in his hands finally slowed, and the last echo of the system's notifications faded into the background of his thoughts. Most adventurers would have turned back immediately, reported the anomaly, gathered a party, come back stronger, safer, smarter. That was how the world worked. That was how people survived. Kael looked down at the corpse at his feet, then at the dark tunnels stretching deeper into the earth, and made a different choice. Again, he muttered quietly, the word carrying more weight than it should have. He adjusted his grip on the sword, ignoring the sting of his wounds, and stepped forward. The deeper sections of the mine were narrower, older, less stable. The wooden supports creaked faintly as he passed, and the air grew thicker, heavier, as if the place itself resisted being entered. But Kael wasn't focused on the environment anymore. His mind replayed the fight over and over. The speed of the creature, the randomness of its attacks, the moment where everything shifted. Not when he struck it, not when he killed it. Earlier, when he stopped trying to fight correctly. That was the part that mattered. Another sound, faint, almost imperceptible, slid through the tunnel ahead. Kael didn't tense this time. He didn't prepare a stance, didn't wait for the perfect angle. He moved forward instead, faster, forcing the encounter before it could control the pace. The second creature hit him harder than the first. It came from above again, but faster, its claws catching his shoulder and spinning him off balance before he could fully react. Pain flared, sharper this time, deeper. Kael gritted his teeth and pushed through it, not retreating, not resetting. He swung immediately, a rough, unrefined strike that clipped the creature's side as it moved. Not effective, not efficient, but it forced a reaction. That was enough. The fight was worse than the first, messier, less controlled. Kael took more hits, missed more strikes. His breathing became uneven, his movements slower. But he didn't stop. He didn't pull back to recover. He didn't try to regain control. He stayed in it. Constant pressure, constant motion. The creature adapted again, faster than before, but Kael was already changing too. Not in skill, not in technique, but in approach. He stopped thinking about winning. He focused on continuing. That was the difference. When the final blow came, it wasn't clean. It wasn't precise. It was a desperate off-balance thrust that barely connected, but it connected enough. The creature collapsed, its form dissolving into stillness. Kael dropped to one knee immediately after, his body finally demanding what it had been denied. Air, rest, relief. He didn't give it long, because the system triggered again. Experience gained. He looked up this time, eyes narrowing slightly as the number appeared. Again, too high. Not just higher than expected, higher than it should be by any reasonable measure. Level up. Once, twice, 3 times, faster than before. Kael let out a slow breath, something cold and focused settling into his chest. So it's not a fluke, he murmured. He pushed himself back to his feet, ignoring the protest in his muscles, and looked deeper into the mine. It's a pattern. That changed everything. Most adventurers optimized for safety, balanced risk and reward, took fights they could win cleanly, efficiently, with minimal damage. That was how the system was supposed to work. Kael tilted his head slightly, considering that. Then he laughed, quiet, breathless, but real. Yeah, not doing that. He moved again, faster now, not recklessly, but deliberately pushing into danger instead of avoiding it. The third fight came sooner than expected. This time there were 2 of them. Kael saw them just before they struck, shapes in the dark, moving in sync for a fraction of a second before splitting apart. He didn't hesitate, didn't consider retreat. He stepped forward. The first creature lunged low. The second followed from the side. Kael twisted between them, not cleanly, not perfectly, but enough to avoid being hit directly. One claw grazed his side. The other tore across his thigh. He stumbled, but didn't fall. Too slow, he muttered to himself, even as pain flared through his leg. He adjusted immediately. Not by fixing the mistake, but by changing the pattern entirely. Instead of reacting to both, he committed to one. Hard, fast, overwhelming. He drove forward toward the closer creature, ignoring the second entirely for a moment that should have been fatal. The risk paid off. The first creature wasn't prepared for the sudden aggression. Kael's blade struck deep, not perfectly placed, but with enough force to disrupt it. The second creature hit him from behind, hard. He felt something crack, ribs maybe. Didn't matter. He finished the first before turning. The second fight was shorter, not easier, but simpler. 1 opponent instead of 2. Kael moved differently now, faster, sharper, not because he had trained, but because he had already failed once in this fight. And the system seemed to reward that. When the last creature fell, Kael didn't drop this time. He stayed standing, barely, his breath ragged, blood soaking into his clothes, vision slightly blurred at the edges. Then the system triggered again, and this time, he smiled before it even finished. Experience gained. The number was higher, significantly. Level up. Again, again, again. The notifications stacked faster than before, almost overlapping, the sensation of growth hitting him in waves instead of pulses. Kael leaned back against the rough stone wall, letting out a low, unsteady laugh. Yeah, okay. His eyes drifted closed for a second, then snapped open again as something else appeared. Not a notification, not exactly. a line of text, different from the others.
Growth rate, irregular.
Kael stared at it, the words lingering longer than they should have before fading. Irregular, he repeated quietly. Not wrong, not error, just outside the expected pattern. He pushed himself off the wall slowly, his body protesting every movement, but something else overriding it now. Not just adrenaline, not just survival. Understanding. It's not just danger, he said, voice low, steady despite everything. It's how I handle it. That was the key. Not the level of the enemy alone, not the risk by itself, but the response, the struggle, the adaptation. Kael looked down at his blood-stained hands, then flexed his fingers slightly. They felt stronger, not massively, not overwhelmingly, but noticeably, and more importantly, faster to change. He looked deeper into the mine again. It was darker now, quieter, but not empty. He could feel it. More creatures, stronger ones, waiting. A normal adventurer would leave, heal, come back prepared. Kael took a step forward instead. Then another. Let's see, he murmured, a faint edge of anticipation creeping into his voice despite the exhaustion.
How far this goes.
Somewhere in the depths of the system, far beyond anything Kael could perceive, something shifted. Not a reaction, not yet. Just attention. Focused. Curious. Watching. Because what Kael was doing wasn't how the game was meant to be played. And for the first time, it wasn't sure how to respond. By the time Kael emerged from the mine, the sun had already begun to rise.
He didn't remember leaving.
One moment he had been deep underground, surrounded by shifting shadows and relentless movement. And the next, he was standing at the edge of the forest, the early light cutting through the trees in long, pale streaks. His body felt wrong. Not just exhausted, not just injured, different. Every step carried a strange lightness, every breath steadier than it should have been after what he had just endured. He looked down at his hands again, flexing them slowly. The tremor was gone, the hesitation too. In its place was something sharper, more responsive, like his body had learned something his mind hadn't fully caught up to yet. Level 22, he muttered under his breath, still not entirely believing it. Less than a day ago, he had been 5. That wasn't growth, that was acceleration. And it wasn't slowing down. The city gates opened just as he approached, guards barely sparing him a glance. To them, he was just another human adventurer, tired, dirty, insignificant. That part hadn't changed. Not yet. Inside the guild hall, however, things were different. Conversations filled the space as usual, but there was an undercurrent now. Low voices, quick glances toward the quest board, something unsettled lingering beneath the routine noise. Kael stepped inside quietly, making his way toward the counter. The clerk looked up this time. Actually looked. His eyes narrowed slightly, confusion flickering across his face before settling into something closer to suspicion. "You took the mine request," he said slowly. Kael nodded once. "Yeah." The clerk leaned back, studying him more carefully now. "You're still alive." "Seems that way." A pause, then, "Report?" Kael considered for a moment. He could explain it. The creatures, the fights, the way the system reacted. But even as the thoughts formed, he already knew how it would sound. Impossible, or worse, dangerous. Irregular monsters, he said instead. Stronger than expected, but manageable. The clerk's eyes flicked briefly to the side, toward a small cluster of adventurers listening a little too closely. You cleared it? Not completely. That was true.
There was more down there. Much more.
The clerk nodded slowly, though the suspicion didn't leave his expression. You'll still get partial credit. He reached for a ledger, making a quick note. But next time, bring a party. That place isn't meant for solo runs. Kael didn't respond to that. Instead, he turned toward the quest board again. This time, people noticed. It wasn't immediate.
Not dramatic. Just a few glances at first, then more. Because something about him didn't match what they expected. Not his gear, not his appearance, but something subtler. Presence. A level difference that wasn't supposed to exist. One of the adventurers near the board frowned slightly, eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. "Hey," the man said, voice uncertain.
What level are you?
Kael didn't answer right away. He didn't owe anyone that. But the question hung in the air, drawing more attention, more eyes turning in his direction. 22, he said finally. Silence. Not total. The guild was too busy for that, but the space around him shifted. That's not possible, someone muttered. He was 5 yesterday, another voice added. Kael's gaze flicked briefly toward them, then back to the board. Guess you were wrong. That didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. A figure stepped forward through the small crowd. Tall, composed, familiar. The elf from before. Her eyes met his, sharper now, more focused than they had been the day before. You went into the mine alone, she said. It wasn't a question. Kael nodded. Yeah. And came back at 22. Seems that way. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to find the flaw in the statement. That level of growth, she said slowly, is not natural. Kael shrugged slightly. Neither was what was in that mine. A faint flicker of something crossed her expression. Not disbelief, not exactly. Concern, maybe. Or interest. The mage behind her spoke next, his tone more analytical than before. Even so, experience gain follows a curve. It doesn't spike like that, not without external amplification. Did you use an artifact? Another adventurer asked. Forbidden magic? A contract? The questions came faster now, overlapping, each one more speculative than the last. Kael let them talk for a moment, then shook his head once. No, that wasn't enough. It wasn't an answer they could accept. Because if it was true, if there was no artifact, no external source, then the only explanation left was one they weren't ready to consider. That the system itself wasn't working the way they thought it did. The elf stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. Then explain it. Kael met her gaze evenly. For a moment, he thought about telling her. About explaining what he had noticed, the way the fights escalated, the way the system responded differently when things went wrong, when he pushed past what should have been safe. But even as the words formed, he realized something. He didn't fully understand it yet. Not completely. And until he did, explaining it would only make it easier for others to interfere. I got lucky, he said instead. It was the worst possible answer, because no one believed it. The tension in the room shifted again, sharper this time. Not just curiosity now, something closer to unease. The idea of luck breaking the system was more dangerous than any artifact. It meant unpredictability. The mage shook his head slightly. Luck doesn't scale like that. Maybe it does, Kael replied, turning back to the board. If you push it far enough. He didn't wait for a response. His eyes scanned the remaining quests, filtering them differently now. Not for safety, not for efficiency, for potential, for risk. for something that could push him further along that curve. He stopped on one near the center. Deep forest rupture, high threat zone. Recommended level, 30+. Party required, 4 to 6. Kael reached out and took it. The movement was small, simple, but it drew every eye in the room. "You're not serious," someone said. "You'll die," another added. The elf's voice cut through them all. "You are not ready for that." Kael glanced at her briefly.
Was I ready for the mine?
She didn't answer, because they both knew the answer to that. No, he hadn't been. And that was exactly the point. Kael turned back toward the exit, the quest slip already in his hand. As he walked away, the whispers followed him, not loud, not aggressive, but persistent. Confusion, doubt, speculation, and beneath it all, something else. Fear. Not of what he was, but of what he represented. Because if Kael was right, if the system could be pushed beyond its expected limits, then everything they thought they knew about strength, about growth, about destiny, was incomplete. Outside the guild, Kael paused for a moment, looking down at the quest in his hand. Level 30+, party required, high threat. He exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he murmured, "that should be enough." He started walking again, faster this time. Behind him, inside the guild, the conversation didn't settle. It spread, quietly, rapidly, because anomalies didn't stay hidden for long. And somewhere, beyond the reach of any guild or kingdom, something else had taken notice. Not curiosity this time, not passive observation, recognition. Because the irregular growth wasn't just continuing, it was accelerating, and the curve was starting to break. The deeper forest did not feel like part of the same world. Kael noticed it the moment the trees thickened enough to block out the sky entirely, turning daylight into something dim and distorted, like a memory of light rather than the real thing. The air was heavier here, not just humid, but dense in a way that pressed faintly against his lungs with every breath. It wasn't dangerous in the way a monster was dangerous. It was worse. It was constant. "High threat zone," Kael muttered, glancing briefly at the quest slip before tucking it away. "Yeah, that fits." He didn't slow down. If anything, he moved faster, pushing deeper along a narrow, overgrown path that looked less like a trail and more like something carved out by things that didn't care about being seen. The system pulsed faintly in the back of his awareness, quieter than it had been in the mine, but still present, still watching. He could feel it now. Not as a voice, not as a guide, just attention. Waiting. The first attack came without warning. Not from the front, not from the sides, from below. The ground beneath his foot gave way just slightly, just enough, and something erupted upward in the same instant. A mass of twisted roots and bone-like protrusions snapping toward his leg. Kael reacted on instinct, twisting sideways, but not fast enough. The creature caught his calf, dragging him down hard. He hit the ground with a sharp impact, breath knocked out of him as the thing tightened its grip. "Right," he gasped, forcing air back into his lungs as he slammed his blade downward, hacking at the root-like limb. Not normal enemies. The strike landed, but the creature didn't recoil like the ones in the mine. It adapted immediately, shifting its form, splitting into smaller tendrils that lashed toward him from multiple angles. Kael rolled, barely avoiding one, then another, his body moving before his thoughts could catch up. Pain flared as one of the tendrils grazed his side, tearing through cloth and skin like it wasn't even there. He pushed up, forcing himself to his feet, and changed approach instantly. No hesitation, no testing. He charged, straight into it. The creature reacted, of course it did, but not in time. Kael's blade struck deep into its central mass, not because he aimed perfectly, but because he didn't stop moving long enough for it to fully adjust. It shrieked. Not a sound exactly, more like a vibration in the air, and lashed out violently. He took the hit. There was no avoiding it this time. Something slammed into his ribs again, harder than before, and he felt the sharp, unmistakable crack of something giving way. His vision blurred for a split second. He didn't stop. He couldn't. He drove the blade deeper, twisting it with both hands, forcing the creature to collapse inward on itself. When it finally went still, Kael staggered back, barely managing to stay upright. His breath came in short, uneven bursts now, each inhale sharper than the last. "Okay," he whispered, voice strained. "That's worse." The system triggered. Experience gained. He didn't even look at the number this time. He didn't need to. He could feel it. The surge of growth hit him again, but something was different. Not weaker, not slower, just less clean. Like the system was struggling to process what had just happened. Level up, once, then again. But the delay between them was longer now. Slight, but noticeable. Kael frowned slightly, leaning against a nearby tree as his body tried to stabilize. "So it's not free," he said quietly. "Of course it isn't." That would have been too easy, too simple. He pushed off the tree after a moment, ignoring the sharp protest from his ribs, and took a step forward. Then another. The forest didn't give him time to recover. The second encounter came almost immediately. Not one creature, not two, three. Different shapes this time, taller, faster, their movements more coordinated, less erratic than the mine creatures, but no less dangerous. Kael saw them coming and made a choice instantly. He didn't engage. He ran. Not away, through. He pushed forward at full speed, forcing the creatures to chase, to adapt to his movement instead of the other way around. The ground shifted under his feet, uneven and unpredictable. But he didn't slow. The first creature closed the gap quickly, faster than the others. Kael pivoted sharply, using its momentum against it, his blade flashing out in a quick, brutal arc. The strike landed, but not deep enough. The creature recovered faster than expected, retaliating immediately. Kael barely avoided it, the attack grazing his shoulder and spinning him off balance. He hit the ground again, harder this time. The other two were already closing in. No time, no space. Kael didn't get up. He rolled instead, pulling himself into a low, unstable position and striking upward as the first creature lunged again. The blade connected, this time deeper. The creature faltered. Kael finished it without hesitation. The second hit him before he could turn fully. Pain exploded across his back, driving him forward into the dirt. His vision darkened at the edges again, worse this time. His body was reaching its limit. He could feel it clearly now, muscles slowing, reactions dulling. This was the cost. Not theoretical, not distant, immediate, real. "Keep moving," he forced out through clenched teeth, dragging himself up again. "Don't stop." The third creature hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, adjusting to the new state of the fight. That was enough. Kael used it. He surged forward, not faster than before, not stronger, but more direct. Less wasted movement, less hesitation. The strike that followed wasn't clean. It wasn't efficient, but it was decisive. When the last creature fell, Kael didn't move. He stayed where he was, one knee pressed into the dirt, head lowered, breathing ragged and uneven. Everything hurt. Not in sharp bursts anymore, but in a constant, grinding way that made even staying still feel like effort. The system triggered again. Experience gained. The number came, higher than before. Again. But this time, Kael winced slightly as the next line appeared. Level up. Once. Then nothing. A pause. Longer than before. Then, level up. Again. Slower. Uneven. Kael let out a low breath, something between a laugh and a grimace. Yeah, he muttered. There it is. The cost wasn't just physical. It wasn't just the risk of dying. The system itself was resisting, or maybe adjusting, trying to keep up with something it hadn't been designed for. He pushed himself upright slowly, his movements heavier now, less fluid than before despite the levels he had gained. That was the paradox. He was stronger, but right now, he was also closer to breaking than he had ever been. Kael looked deeper into the forest, where the shadows thickened even further, where the air seemed to press down harder with every step. He could feel it. More danger, more growth, but also more cost. For a brief moment, just a moment, the thought crossed his mind. Turn back, heal, recover, come back later. The smart choice, the safe choice, the normal choice. Kael closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. No, he said quietly, because that wasn't how this worked. Not for him, not anymore. He took another step forward, slower this time, but steady. If I stop, he murmured, voice low but certain, I fall back onto their curve. And that was worse than the pain, worse than the risk, worse than death. Because it meant limits. Kael adjusted his grip on the blade, ignoring the tremor that had started to return. Not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. So we keep going, he said. The forest didn't respond. It didn't need to. It was already waiting. And somewhere beyond the visible layers of the system, the attention that had been watching him sharpened further. Not curiosity anymore, not passive observation. Because the anomaly wasn't just growing, it was starting to push back. And that had consequences. Kael should have stopped. By every rule the world had ever followed, by every lesson drilled into adventurers from the moment they first touched a blade, he should have turned back hours ago. His body was already past the point of safe function. His movements heavier, slower, each step carrying the dull, grinding resistance of accumulated damage. The forest didn't care. It pressed in closer the deeper he went, the space between trees narrowing, the air thick enough now that every breath felt like pulling something heavier than oxygen into his lungs. But Kael kept moving. Not because he was ignoring the cost. He felt it clearly now. Every second, every motion. That was the point. The system reacted to that, not to strength, not to efficiency, to strain, to the moment where something should break and didn't. So let's break it properly, he muttered, voice rough from overuse and lack of rest. The next clearing came suddenly, the dense forest opening into a wide, uneven stretch of ground where the trees had been forced back by something that didn't belong. Kael slowed, not from caution, but because his body demanded it, and looked ahead. The ground wasn't natural. It was fractured, split in jagged lines that pulsed faintly with a dim, unstable glow. The air here was worse, not just heavy but unstable, like something was constantly shifting just out of alignment. Rupture, Kael said quietly. That matched the quest. High threat zone. He stepped forward anyway. The moment his foot crossed into the clearing, the ground reacted. Not violently, not immediately, but enough. The fractures shifted, the faint glow intensifying as something beneath the surface stirred. Kael didn't wait this time. He moved forward fast, pushing deeper into the unstable ground before whatever was coming could fully emerge. That was the pattern now. Don't react. Force it to react. It worked. Something broke through the surface ahead, a larger creature than anything he had faced so far, its form less defined, like pieces of different things forced together without consistency. It didn't move like the others. It didn't need to. The ground itself shifted around it, fragments rising and collapsing as it advanced. Kael charged it, not because it was the best option, because it was the only one that fit the pattern he had been building. The first exchange was brutal. The creature didn't strike directly. It reshaped the terrain, forcing Kael off balance, dragging him into unstable footing where every step threatened to collapse beneath him. He adjusted immediately, lowering his center of gravity, reducing movement to the minimum needed to stay upright. The second shift caught him anyway. The ground gave way under his left foot, pulling him down just enough for the creature to close the distance. The impact came from the side, heavy, blunt, more like being hit by the environment itself than a limb. Kael felt something give again in his ribs, the damage stacking, compounding. His vision blurred harder this time, edges darkening, focus slipping. He hit the ground and didn't get up right away. For a fraction of a second, just a fraction, his body refused to respond. That was new. That was dangerous. "Move," he forced out, voice barely more than a breath. His fingers tightened around the blade. His body followed a moment later. Not fast, not clean, but enough. The creature pressed forward, the ground shifting again, trying to pin him, to remove the space he needed to continue. Kael changed approach instantly. He stopped trying to maintain balance. Instead, he let the instability work for him. He moved with it, not against it, allowing himself to fall forward as the ground shifted, turning the loss of footing into momentum. The strike that followed wasn't controlled. It wasn't precise. It was carried by motion he hadn't fully chosen. But it landed. The blade cut into the creature's unstable form, disrupting whatever cohesion held it together. It reacted, not by recoiling, but by shifting more violently, the entire clearing responding as if connected to it. The fractures widened, the glow intensified, the air thickened further. Kael pushed through it, not because he had strength left, because he had no alternative. The fight stretched longer than anything before. Not seconds, not moments, minutes. Each exchange slower, heavier, both sides adapting, both sides degrading. Kael's movements became less efficient, less controlled, but also less predictable. He wasn't fighting cleanly anymore. He was surviving moment to moment, forcing the creature to adjust to something that didn't follow any stable pattern. Eventually, that mattered. The creature hesitated, just slightly. Its shifts became less immediate, its responses delayed by fractions that hadn't existed at the start. Kael saw it. Not clearly, not consciously, but enough. He committed everything into the next movement. No adjustment, no correction, just forward. The blade struck deep into the core of the creature's unstable mass. For a moment, just a moment, the entire clearing seemed to pause. Then it collapsed. The fractures dimmed. The shifting ground stilled. The creature disintegrated into nothing. Kael remained standing for exactly 1 second after it ended. Then his body gave out completely. He dropped to the ground hard, the impact sending a dull shock through what was left of his strength. This time, he didn't try to get up. He couldn't. Not immediately. His breathing was shallow now, uneven, each inhale dragging through pain that had stopped being sharp and become something heavier, deeper. The system triggered. Experience gained. The number appeared, higher than anything before, by a margin that would have been impossible under normal conditions. Kael let out a weak, almost disbelieving laugh. Of course it is. Then the next line came. Level up. Once, then again, then pause. Longer. Noticeably longer. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly even through the exhaustion. There it is, he whispered. You're slowing it down. Another delay. Then, level up. Again. But the system didn't stop there. Something else appeared. Different. Not a standard notification. Limit detected. Kael's breath hitched slightly. Not from fear, from recognition. Yeah, he murmured. About time. The next line followed almost immediately. Removing. For a moment, just a moment, nothing happened. No surge, no immediate change, just a stillness that felt heavier than anything before. Then it hit. Not like the previous level gains, not in waves, in a single sharp shift. Something fundamental changed, not just in his body, but in the way the system itself responded to him. Kael gasped slightly, air catching in his throat as his muscles tightened, then released, then stabilized in a way that felt different. Not healed, not restored, but recalibrated. He lay there for a few seconds longer, letting the sensation settle, letting his breathing even out just enough to function again. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up. It took longer this time, more effort, but he did it. When he finally stood, the clearing around him was still, quiet, stable again. But Kael wasn't looking at the environment. He was looking at himself. No cap, he said quietly. Not a guess, not a theory, a conclusion. The system hadn't increased his limit. It had removed it, or at least the part it could detect. Kael let out a slow breath, something like understanding settling into place beneath the exhaustion. That's why, he continued, voice low. That's why it works. Not just faster growth, not just higher gains, infinite scaling. As long as he kept pushing past what should have stopped him, the system would keep adjusting, removing limits, expanding the curve. He looked back toward the direction he had come from, the forest, the path that led back to the city, to safety, to recovery. Then he looked forward, deeper into the rupture zone, where the ground still faintly glowed in places, where the air remained heavy, where stronger things waited. Kael tightened his grip on the blade, the trimmer in his hands gone again, not because he was uninjured, but because something else now outweighed the damage. Yeah, he said quietly, we're not stopping. Because now it wasn't just about leveling faster. It wasn't just about catching up. It was about something else entirely. Breaking the system wasn't an accident. It was the path. And now that he understood it, there was no going back. By the time Kael reached the outer edge of the forest again, the world had already begun to react. He felt it before he saw it. Not in the system, not directly, but in the way the environment shifted around him, the subtle tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Something had changed, not just in him, in how everything else perceived him. He stepped out from beneath the dense canopy into open ground, the sudden light forcing his eyes to narrow slightly. His body was still damaged, deeply, but it no longer slowed him the way it should have. The pain was still there, constant, grinding, but it no longer dictated his limits. That was new. That was wrong. Or at least it would have been under normal rules. Kael exhaled slowly, adjusting to it, letting the sensation settle without trying to fully understand it.
No cap, he repeated quietly.
Not as a realization this time, but as a confirmation. Behind him, the forest remained silent. Ahead, the road back to the city stretched out in familiar lines. For a brief moment, everything looked normal. Then he saw them. They weren't hiding. They weren't subtle.
A group of adventurers stood across the road, positioned deliberately,
Their stances controlled, their spacing intentional. Not random, not coincidental. Waiting. Kael slowed slightly, his gaze sweeping over them, taking in details automatically now. Levels, equipment, posture. There were 5 of them, mixed group. 2 warriors, 1 mage, 1 archer, and at the center, an elf. Not the same one from before. Older, stronger, composed in a way that suggested experience far beyond the others. "You're Kael," the elf said as he approached. Not a question. Kael stopped a few steps away, his grip on his blade relaxed, but ready. "Depends who's asking." The elf's expression didn't change. Someone who would prefer this to remain contained. Kael let out a faint breath, something between amusement and understanding. "Yeah," he said. "Figured it wouldn't take long." The mage stepped forward slightly, eyes fixed on Kael with open curiosity, almost fascination. "Your growth rate is abnormal," he said. "Beyond abnormal. It violates system expectations." "That's the idea," Kael replied. The archer shifted position, not aggressively, but enough to cut off an angle. "We don't want to kill you," she said, "but we can't let this continue unchecked." Kael glanced briefly at her, then back at the elf. "You think you can stop it?" A pause. Not long, but real. The elf didn't answer immediately, because the truth was obvious. They didn't know. And that uncertainty was the real reason they were here. "We think," the elf said finally, "that the system has rules for a reason." Kael tilted his head slightly. "Yeah," he said, "so it doesn't break." The elf's gaze sharpened. "Exactly." Kael smiled faintly. Too late. He moved first. Not fast, not explosive, just earlier. Before they fully committed, before they settled into a fixed pattern. The warriors reacted instantly, stepping forward to intercept, their movements clean, practiced, efficient. Kael didn't meet them directly. He shifted between them, not avoiding their strikes completely, but not letting them land cleanly either. One blade grazed his side, another clipped his shoulder. Under normal conditions, those hits would have forced a reset, a defensive reposition. Kael ignored them. He kept moving forward. The mage began casting, energy gathering rapidly, structured, precise. Kael changed direction immediately, breaking his path unpredictably, forcing the mage to adjust mid-cast. That delay, small as it was, mattered. The spell released, but not where it should have. Kael was already somewhere else. The archer fired next, fast, accurate. 3 shots in quick succession. Kael didn't dodge all of them. He couldn't. One struck his arm, another grazed his side. The third missed entirely. He didn't slow. That was the difference. The elf moved then, faster than the others. Cleaner. Her presence shifted the flow of the fight immediately, her strikes not just reacting to Kael's movement, but anticipating it. This was different. This was someone operating closer to the system's peak. Kael met her directly, not because it was the best option, because it was the only one that pushed him further. Their first exchange was sharp, controlled, precise. She was better, technically, structurally. Every movement efficient, every strike calculated. Kael wasn't. His movements were rougher, less predictable, driven more by adaptation than design. That gap should have decided the fight. It didn't. Because Kael didn't degrade the way he should have. Every hit he took didn't slow him down, it forced adjustment. Immediate, unstable, but effective. The elf noticed it quickly. Her strikes became sharper, more aggressive, pushing harder, trying to overwhelm before the pattern could shift further. Kael pushed back, not with strength, with pressure, constant, unrelenting. The longer the fight went, the more it changed. The warriors struggled to re-engage cleanly. The mage's spells became less precise as Kael's movement refused to settle into something predictable. The archer adjusted angles repeatedly, but each time Kael was already somewhere slightly different than expected. The system pulsed again. Not visibly, not in notifications, but in response. Kael felt it clearly now. Not resistance, not exactly. Adjustment. Trying to reclassify what he was doing, trying to define it. The elf struck again, faster, harder, a direct attempt to end the exchange. Kael didn't block. He stepped into it. The blade cut across his side, deep enough to matter. He didn't stop. His own strike followed immediately, not perfect, not precise, but timed in a way that didn't align with the system's expectations of exchange. It landed. The elf staggered slightly, not heavily, but enough. That was the break. The others saw it. Hesitation spread, not fear yet, but doubt. The pattern wasn't holding. Kael pressed forward, not faster, just more. More pressure, more instability, more deviation from what should have been happening. The system reacted again, stronger this time. Something shifted at the edge of perception. A line, faint, fragmented, flashed briefly. Entity exceeds classification. Kael exhaled sharply. Something like a laugh breaking through despite the fight. "Yeah," he muttered. "That sounds about right." The elf stepped back this time, not retreating, reevaluating. Her gaze fixed on him, sharper than before, no longer just assessing strength, but something deeper. "You're not leveling," she said quietly. "Not the way the system defines it." Kael shrugged slightly, blood dripping from his side, his stance uneven but stable. "Guess I'm doing it wrong." The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was enough. Because in that moment, the balance shifted, not completely, not decisively, but enough that the outcome was no longer certain. And in a system built on certainty, that was the real anomaly. The elf straightened slightly, her expression settling into something more controlled. "We're not your enemy," she said. Kael looked at her, then at the others, then back at the road leading forward. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "You're part of the system." He adjusted his grip on the blade again, slower this time, more deliberate. "And I'm not." He moved again before they could respond. Not to finish the fight, not to chase them down. Forward, past them, because that was the direction that mattered. The group didn't stop him. Not immediately, not decisively, because for the first time, they weren't sure they could. Kael didn't look back. Behind him, the system continued to adjust, to analyze, to try to define something that refused to settle into any stable form. And ahead, the path didn't narrow. It expanded. Because now it wasn't just about leveling faster. It was about something else entirely. Breaking the system had consequences, and Kael was already moving into them. They stopped trying to understand him. That was the first thing Kael noticed as he moved beyond the edge of the road, leaving behind the group that had come to contain him. Not because they accepted what he was doing, not because they agreed with it, but because the system itself had failed to give them a framework to interpret it. And without that, there was nothing to hold on to. The world beyond the controlled zones felt different now. Not just more dangerous, but less defined. The paths were less traveled, the monsters less categorized, the rules less enforced.
This was where the system's influence weakened, not in function, but in certainty. Kael moved through it steadily, his pace no longer driven by urgency, but by direction. He wasn't chasing levels anymore, not in the way he had been, because the numbers had started to lose meaning. He still saw them, still felt the system register his actions, still recognized the familiar pulse of experience gain and progression. But the intervals were inconsistent now, the jumps irregular, the feedback delayed or fragmented. At some point, he wasn't sure when, it had stopped being a clear ladder. It had become something else, a curve without edges, or maybe without end. The next encounter didn't announce itself. There was no shift in the environment, no sudden spike in tension. Just a presence, subtle at first, then undeniable. Kael stopped, not because he had to, because he chose to. The thing ahead didn't move like the others. It didn't attack immediately. It didn't react to his presence in a predictable way. It simply existed. Tall, still, its form barely held together by anything Kael could recognize, as if it wasn't meant to be seen in a stable state. The air around it bent slightly, not violently, but enough to distort the edges of reality in a way that made it difficult to focus on directly. "You're new," Kael said quietly. The entity didn't respond. Not verbally, not physically. But something shifted. Not in space, in awareness. It acknowledged him. That was enough. Kael stepped forward, not cautiously, not recklessly, just forward. The moment he entered its range, the world reacted. Not the ground, not the air. The system. It pulsed, harder than it ever had before, the feedback immediate and overwhelming, as if something fundamental was being triggered all at once. Notifications tried to form, half visible, incomplete, overlapping each other without structure. Classification, error. Threat level, undefined. Engagement. They didn't finish. They couldn't. Kael exhaled slowly, his grip tightening on the blade, not from tension, but from focus. "Yeah," he murmured. "That sounds about right." The entity moved. Not fast, not slow, just without transition. One moment it was still. The next, it wasn't where it had been. Kael reacted instantly, not by tracking it, but by moving before it completed whatever action it had initiated. That was the difference now. He didn't follow the fight. He interrupted it. The first exchange didn't connect cleanly, not on either side. The entity's movement didn't follow momentum or direction in a way Kael could predict. And Kael's response didn't follow structure the entity could compensate for. The result was chaos. Controlled, but unstable. Kael felt it immediately. This wasn't like the others, not something that adapted within the system. This was something the system itself struggled to define, which meant it wasn't bound the same way. That made it dangerous. That made it perfect. The next movement came faster, or maybe it didn't. Time felt uneven here, stretched and compressed in ways that made reaction less about speed and more about presence. Kael adjusted, not consciously but instinctively, abandoning any attempt to measure or predict. He moved when movement was required, struck when an opening existed, even if he couldn't define it. The entity responded in kind,
Not learning, not adapting, just existing in a way that forced the fight into a state where traditional progression didn't apply. Kael took a hit. He knew that much. He felt the impact, not as pain, but as disruption. Something passing through him rather than into him. His body staggered, not from damage, but from misalignment. He corrected instantly, forcing himself back into stability through sheer motion. Not recovery, continuation. That was enough. The fight didn't escalate in the way his previous ones had. There was no clear increase in intensity, no defined phases, just pressure, constant, unresolving. Kael pushed into it, not harder, not faster, just further. Further outside what the system expected, further beyond what should have been sustainable. The entity shifted again, closer now, its form less stable the longer the fight continued, as if the act of engaging with Kael was forcing it into a state it couldn't fully maintain. That was the opening. Not a weakness, a limit. Kael stepped into it without hesitation. The strike that followed wasn't something he had practiced, wasn't something he had learned. It wasn't even something he could repeat. It was a moment, singular, unstructured, where everything aligned just enough for impact to occur. The blade passed through the entity's form, not cutting, not piercing, just intersecting. For a brief instant, the world stopped. Then the entity fractured, not violently, not explosively, quietly, like something that had been held together by rules that no longer applied. Kael stood there as it dissolved, his breathing steady despite everything, his body no longer reacting in the way it once had to damage or strain. The system tried to respond. He felt it, stronger than ever before. But the output didn't match the input. Notifications flickered, half-formed, incomplete, unable to resolve into something coherent. Experience, level, entity, then nothing. Silence. Kael waited, not for a reward, not for confirmation, just to see what would happen next. Nothing did. No level increase, no clear progression, just stillness. He looked down at his hands again, flexing them slowly. They felt the same and completely different. Not stronger, not faster, just unconstrained. So that's it, he said quietly. Not disappointment, not confusion, understanding. The system had stopped trying to quantify him, not because it couldn't track growth, because growth, as it defined it, no longer applied. Kael lifted his gaze, looking out across the horizon where the world stretched further than any defined zone, any structured path. For the first time since he had started, since the mine, since the first irregular gain, there was no immediate direction pulling him forward, no clear escalation waiting just ahead. Just possibility. Behind him, the system continued to exist, stable, predictable, functional for everyone else. Ahead of him, it didn't matter. Kael adjusted his grip on the blade one last time, then relaxed it, letting the tension fall away completely. "You reached your limit," he said softly, not to anyone present, but to something larger. Something that had defined everything until now. He took a step forward, then another. "We never had one." And this time, there was no system response at all.